Spider-Man the Animated Series didn't just show up out of the blue. It dropped in 1994 during a huge wave of superhero hype. Batman the Animated Series was already changing the game. X-Men was also dominating Saturday mornings. And this wasn't Marvel's first rodeo with the wall crawler. They tried Spider-Man cartoons before, from the psychedelic 60s version to the meme-worthy Spider-Man pointing era. But this was the Spider-Man for the 90s. Fox Kids and Marvel brought in a guy named John Semper Jr. to run the show. And instead of keeping it light and one-off like most cartoons back then, Semper said no, we're doing a full arc. He wanted to tell long-form stories. Continuity, character growth, emotional fallout, all that stuff makes Spider-Man who he is. And he pulled it off over 5 seasons. We watched Peter Parker deal with villains, guilt, clones, multiverses, marriage proposals, alternate dimensions, all while trying to pay rent and pass his midterms. The character designs were bold, clean, comic book sharp. And remember those 3D cityscapes? Fully rendered CGI backgrounds. Groundbreaking for the time, kinda hilarious in hindsight. But back then, it felt futuristic. It felt cool, it felt new. Watching Spider-Man swing through a digital New York, that was magic. It had limits though, real ones. Censorship was kind of intense. No one could say kill or die. Guns couldn't look real. Nobody could actually die on screen even if they clearly did. Somehow the writers found ways around it. They made the show work by leaning into emotion, consequences, and character. You never saw Uncle Ben get shot, but you felt it every single episode. And casting? Spot on. Christopher Daniel Barnes voiced Peter Parker like a guy who was always on the edge of a breakdown, which honestly is perfect. Peter should sound like he's barely holding it together. The villains were iconic. The supporting cast was deep, and the tone walked a tightrope between superhero action and soap opera level drama. This wasn't just punch 'em ups. This was a show where you could binge watch 6 episodes and still not know if MJ was a real person or a clone. As the series went on, the stories got even wilder. Multiverse stuff, time travel, clone sagas, but somehow it all felt earned. For the kids in the 90s, this was our Spider-Verse. We didn't even know what to call it back then, but this show planted the seeds. Spider-Man the Animated Series didn't just make Spidey cool again, it turned him into a myth. And for a lot of us, this was the MCU before the MCU. It taught us about consequence, about sacrifice, and yeah, about great power and great responsibility. This is where the web really started, with Spider-Man the Animated Series. And it's what we're going to talk about today in this episode of Toonology. So welcome to the lab. What's up, everybody, and welcome once again. This is Toonology, the study of cartoons, and I'm your host, your lead toonologist, your lead scientist, your man in charge here at Toonology headquarters, Toonology HQ, and all that good stuff. I'm your host. I'm Will Bryant, and I'm glad to have you guys back with me. If you're coming back here from episode 1, if this is your first time here, then so be it, and I'm still glad to have you. We're here to talk about all things Spider-Man. Last episode, we started it off with maybe the greatest of all time, Batman the Animated Series, and here we are with, man, if somebody wanted to tell me that this was their greatest cartoon or greatest animated show of all time, I don't know if I would really fight them on it. I don't know if I would that wouldn't really be my hill to die on, you know? But either way, this cartoon really molded me for like the rest of my life. I didn't grow up being the person that knew all about comic book lore. I didn't read comic books when I was younger. So I didn't really know the ins and outs of Marvel or DC. My first intro to anything comics was truly the Saturday morning cartoons, and specifically the Fox Kids ones. So I saw Spider-Man and X-Men around the same time. Interestingly enough, I kind of remember X-Men being almost more adult to me, I thought like I don't know if I'm old enough to really get X-Men yet, but also because I don't remember seeing X-Men from the beginning. When I go back and I binge watch Spider-Man, I kind of remember a lot of it in that order. So maybe I was just more involved and in tune with Spider-Man at the time. And it makes sense because X-Men came out 2 years before Spider-Man, if I'm not mistaken. Let's just get into it while we're at it. Why not? That Fox Kids era was really kind of big for me. I don't know why. I don't know if it was just this tribalism that I instituted on myself, but instituted, is that a word? I was more of a Fox Kids person or kid than a WB Kids kid or a Cartoon Network Kids kid. And with hindsight being 50-50 and as clear as it can be, I wish that I was just more absorbing of all of those different mediums at the same time. Unfortunately I wasn't, but either way, I'm going back now as an adult and getting more into it. This one I was definitely watching as a kid. Look, this one, it set the stage for Spider-Man for generations to come. Before Toby, before Tom or Andrew, it was Spider-Man, the anime series. It was that cartoon. For anyone my age and anyone that's paid to go see the movies or has taken their children to the movies now, this is what we think of for the most part. It's this cartoon, this animated series. So I don't really enjoy throwing around the word iconic, but darn it, I seem to be doing a podcast series about a lot of iconic stuff. Do I regret calling Kevin Conroy iconic? No. Do I regret calling Mark Hamill's portrayal of Joker iconic? No. And is Spider-Man the animated series on Fox Kids iconic? You darn right it is, and I don't regret saying that either. I mentioned earlier, it went on for 5 seasons, and we're going to talk about a lot of stuff, like some of the best episodes, some of the worst episodes, some of my favorite or, let's see, best characters, allies, villains, all that good stuff. But, before that, let's bring it back a little bit. Let's get into the origins and the ink of this cartoon and what really went into the behind the scenes stuff before a single episode was even, produced or aired. It did debut in 94 on Fox Kids, as I said, as a growing part of Marvel TV's animation push following X-Men. I mentioned John Semper Jr., and don't worry, we will be talking about him in more detail. He served as a showrunner and head writer. It was produced by Marvel Films Animation, of course, with Saban or Saban. I think it's Saban, right? Saban Entertainment. And by the way, if that sounds familiar, anyone that has ever watched basically any or most Power Rangers knows what Saban is all about. Real quick, the animation was handled by Tokyo Movie Shinshasa, TMS, and Coco Enterprises. Solid visuals, but sometimes I've heard people complain about some like inconsistencies from the animation. I'm not really that type of animation connoisseur that notices, I don't know, when animation is off or really. There's really, when watching the Batman animated series, there's really like only one episode that I watched where I really wondered what was going on with the animation. But besides that, and besides the obvious change in animation styles from season 1 to 2 and 3, I can't be that guy that, or I'm not that guy that says, oh wow, that like frame was really off or something. That, that's not me. So to me, the animation in Spider-Man, it's awesome. It's pretty friggin' awesome. Especially the character designs. The character designs and the animation, it made it so that it brought every comic version of that character into the animated world, and then solidified that version of it as like the version that fans would love and want to see from then on out. You know, like whenever you see the Rhino reimagined, no one's ever really that happy about the design. You know, whether it's Paul Giamatti or in the Andrew Garfield Spider-Mans, or it's whoever played Rhino in the Craven movie, you know, it's always like, why did they do that? And, you know, the same goes for, you know, if you think about like Shocker, you know, the Shocker, yeah, his outfit's kind of ridiculous, but we love it. And whenever we don't see that in some other medium, we're like, yeah, why didn't they, you know, give us a little bit of what we wanted? With Vulture's kind of another ridiculous character, and Michael Keaton did his darndest to portray him in the film, but I believe it was the first Tom Holland film, if I'm not mistaken. But it's still, or is that the Andrew Garfield? No, it's Tom Holland, right? I don't know. I mixed these all up. Was that Andrew Garfield Spider-Man? Michael Keaton? No, because that was Andrew Garfield fought Lizard and then Electro. Man, there's so many of them. Anyways, point being, that Vulture, like, he wore like a bomber jacket, and of course you're not getting that green suit with the green wings, but don't we kind of want that, you know? I could think of a bunch more heroes that, you know, in a way we never got like the coolest. Or listen, Green Goblin in the cartoons looked scary and crazy and awesome. We can admit that Green Goblin suit in Spider-Man 1 with Tobey Maguire and Sam Raimi, that was like a little weird, right? It's like a green Iron Man suit. Like, I don't know. Anyways, the designs in the cartoon, that's what we all love. And yeah, I think there's a lot to be said about that. Something that didn't age well, those CGI web swinging scenes that were meant to be futuristic and, I don't know, cool and next generation style, you know, very 90s. It's just an example, and you saw a lot of it in the 90s. It's an example of people trying to utilize CGI perhaps a smidge too soon, you know? It reminds me a little bit of a show that was pretty popular at the time, Beast Wars. That might be the first like completely CGI television show, and it was an animated show for kids. And I bet at the time, I didn't really watch it much at the time. I saw an episode or two, but I bet at the time, kids thought, man, this is the future, man. This, with my, you know, 56K internet and CD-ROMs or whatever, my laser disc setup, this is the future right here. Let me check my email on America Online and get the Beast Wars cracking. And then when you look back at it, it's you know, maybe a little laughable, a little comical, like, that CGI isn't as good as we thought it was it? Now, not gonna lie, I suddenly kind of want to throw Beast Wars into my list, and you know what? I think I got to do it now. I think at some point we will cover Beast Wars in an episode of Toonology, but you know, there's a bunch of other stuff I got to get to before that. Anyways, my point: the CGI in Spider-Man, yeah, not great. At the time, though, I remember thinking like, whatever, this is kind of cool, and I never really thought like, oh, this is jarring. It was just understood to me that when he swings, that's like the vision or the version that we see. It just kind of felt like I don't know, like a cutscene a little bit, you know? It never bothered me. Maybe that's just because I was a dumb, naive kid, but hey, that was awesome, being dumb and naive. It was great. Can I live? What else is, I mentioned this too. I basically mentioned a bunch of stuff, so I'm going to stop saying I mentioned this and just start mentioning it. heavily restricted by broadcast standards and practices. Now, I've heard in an interview that John Semper Jr. says that they weren't really hampered by or hampered by anything more than every other show, but I'm not sure about that. He claims that he just took it upon himself to play it extra safe. I think it's a little bit of both, because something to back up his point, like X-Men got away with a lot more, or at least tried to get away with a lot more than Spider-Man did. And on another network, yeah, but Batman was doing it too. Spider-Man had to deal with the no killing, no blood. At one point, the word radioactive was going to be a problem, which is funny because it's all about being bitten by a radioactive spider. They didn't even want to say I had to write this one down because I thought it was the most, I don't know, the wildest example, in my opinion, of networks not allowing the TV show to say something. Like, instead of, they couldn't say body. There's the name of what's the name of the cop that falls for Blade at some point. I should know that, but I know she's kind of a minor character. But anyways, there's a cop on the show that befriends Peter Parker and Spider-Man, and they say that they never found a body for somebody, but instead of saying that, she says no corpus delicti, which I guess is Latin and maybe a police term for no body found. So that's how much they would kind of try to tiptoe around the standards and practices of Fox Kids. Despite that they still managed to tell serialized stories that felt comic book accurate, and the tone was always pretty high stakes. Now, let's get into the people that were behind this show that got it off the ground. And I want to get into some, I don't know, people that I kind of have a lot of respect for and like. But before we do that, I got to talk about someone that I've never really actually liked all that much. And I've come to learn that I'm not really the only one. That's this dude, this businessman named Avi Arad. Avi Arad was born on August 1st in 1948 in Israel, immigrated to the U.S., studied industrial management at Hofstra University, and then the main thing about him is that he worked for Toy Biz. Now, if you had action figures as a kid like me, you probably remember Toy Biz. It's a toy company that licensed Marvel characters. This is how Avi Arad's long-term journey with Marvel begins. It's because he ran Toy Biz. I think he ended up owning it or co-owning it. Yeah, in the early 90s, he co-owned Toy Biz and licensed Marvel characters. And he was like, you know what? How the hell am I going to sell more toys? In the early 90s, he struck a deal to make action figures out of Marvel superheroes, and this led to a strategic takeover of Marvel. When Marvel went bankrupt in the mid-90s, Avi Arad and his partner Isaac Perlmutter, or Perlmutter, however you say his name, became key figures in the company's restructuring. Avi Arad co-founded Marvel Films Animation and helped create and produce some of the most iconic 90s animated series, including Spider-Man, the animated series, X-Men, Fantastic Four, Iron Man, Silver Surfer, Incredible Hulk, so on and so forth. And look, not all of them, as you well know, were successful. It's basically X-Men and Spider-Man. Silver Surfer had one season. Iron Man, I think, had 2 seasons. Fantastic Four had 2 seasons. And, Iron Man and Fantastic Four, they're not as highly regarded and remembered as X-Men and Spider-Man. And, I do actually plan on going in and dedicating an entire episode to those as well. But Today we're talking about Spider-Man and how Avi Arad had a hand in all of that. He understood that cartoons would be commercial vehicles for selling toys and genuine storytelling platforms. That dual purpose strategy is very much his fingerprint. But let's not get it wrong. His number one goal in the beginning was selling toys. It even controlled the cartoon in a way. After Spider-Man and all the success that he endured or encountered, I should say, with the animated series, he didn't stop there. He went to movies. He was a key producer for Marvel's early 2000 films. Big ones, huge ones. The culture-shifting movies like X-Men in 2000, Spider-Man in 2002, Spider-Man 2, Spider-Man 3, Daredevil, Hulk, the Fantastic Four movies, all of that. He was a part of all of that. Like, whether or not they were all good, like Hulk and Fantastic Four and Daredevil, that's arguable, sure. I mean, hell, I kind of liked Daredevil and Hulk and even a little bit of Fantastic Four, but they had their issues. Spider-Man 1 and 2 especially, that revolutionized everything. X-Men, that without X-Men, there's nothing. There's no Spider-Man, there's no James Gunn's universe that he's about to launch, there's no MCU phase 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's none of that. With if X-Men 2000 in the year 2000 doesn't succeed, doesn't do what it went on to do, this world, the landscape would be so different in terms of entertainment. He was the chairman and CEO of Marvel Studios until 2006 when he left to form Arad Productions, still focusing on adapting comics and toys into films. His post-Marvel Studios resume, that includes stuff like The Amazing Spider-Man in 2012, Into the Spider-Verse in 2018, and Venom in 2018, along with all of its sequels. So, he's still pumping out stuff. Avi Arad is the reason. Look, I said that he let the cartoons control the action figures, the toys control the cartoons. Well, Avi Arad's the reason that Hobgoblin appeared before Green Goblin in this series, and the reason why, if it were up to Avi Arad, Hobgoblin would have been the main villain, or like Peter Parker's number one foe, or biggest rival, and it wouldn't have been Green Goblin. The only reason why is because the Hobgoblin toy was set to release before the Green Goblin toy. That's why. And Avi Arad said he changed the direction of the cartoon because of the action figure. He was instrumental in making sure that Spider-Man was merchandisable. That meant creating villains and suit variants that could sell figures, so that you wouldn't just get the regular Spider-Man, you get, black suit Spider-Man, or armored Spider-Man, or six-armed Spider-Man, whatever, all that fun stuff. He championed the idea that Marvel characters should have cross-platform synergy: toys, cartoons, comics, and eventually films. His presence loomed large over every Marvel 90s cartoon, often prioritizing action and design over depth. But occasionally, he let the great writers shine despite all that. So Avi Arad, to me, has always felt like one of those shallow businessmen that cared more about the bottom dollar than the depth and the soul and the genuine story of what these comics stand for. It was never about the love of the character or the love of the story. It was always about the love of the dollar and how can he sell more cartoons. So it's not until he takes a step back and lets other people that do have that love and that joy and that respect for the medium that anything that Avi Arad is associated with tends to shine. If it's just a cash grab, then he's all good with that too, but it comes through. So Avi Arad had to be mentioned here before I get to the man that really matters for Spider-Man, the animated series. And that man John Semper Jr., the world builder of Spider-Man. John Semper Jr. was the head writer and showrunner of Spider-Man, the animated series, for its entire 65-episode run. He's widely regarded as the creative force behind the series, responsible for shaping its tone, its serialized storytelling, and its emotional depth. Here's why he's important. The storytelling vision. Semper pushed for long-form, serialized arcs at a time when most Saturday morning cartoons were strictly episodic. His approach let character development build over time, especially Peter Parker's struggles with his identity. His not just his identity, but with responsibility and loss, all that. He really lets that develop, not only from episode to episode, but season to season. He integrated canon and originality. What do I mean by that? He drew heavily from classic Spider-Man comics, but also introduced original concepts that would later influence future adaptations. For example, the idea of Madam Web as a multiversal guide and the Spider-Verse arc, that started here, way before it hit comics or movies. So the emotional core was also something big that John Semper Jr. was responsible for. He emphasized Peter's emotional journey, his guilt, grief, and growth, making it arguably the most psychologically rich Spider-Man show of its time. He found clever ways to adapt complex stories from the comics, like the alien costume and Secret Wars, into TV-friendly arcs without dumbing them down. You know, it takes a lot of skill to take some of the greatest stories from comic books and putting them in a 22-minute episode over a couple of episodes long, like a 5-episode arc, and still make it digestible for a kid and cool enough for an adult, you know? And it wasn't, I know it wasn't advertised for adults back then, but you better believe there's some older people watching it, and now we go back as adults and watch it and say, man, this stuff is pretty good. All those standards and practices stuff, he fought the network. He fought the network interference, the budget issues, and censorship. There wasn't even punching allowed. No punching. I didn't even know that as a kid. Like, I never realized I never saw Spider-Man punch a guy. He's always swinging in and kicking somebody and webbing somebody up, and never punched a guy. I didn't know. Remember the guns? All lasers. Ping, ping, ping. Get hit by a laser 10 times. Doesn't matter. Keep walking. All good. No bullets. What else? All that, and he still delivered one of the most beloved superhero cartoons of the 90s. So John Semper Jr., man, he's like the Kevin Feige of Spider-Man TV. No Semper, no Spider-Verse. His work laid the foundation for Spidey's modern multimedia legacy. Showrunner, writer, world builder. Thank you. He held the entire series together with serialized storytelling, oversaw major arcs, advocated for emotional depth, and all this during Saturday morning cartoons. Thank you, John Semper Jr. And I wanted to throw some love to a couple of other names that you probably don't really hear of too much in terms of Spider-Man. First, let's talk about Bob Richardson just a little bit. He's the supervising producer and one of the directors. He was the main director for most of the show and handled the overall production vision. He previously worked on X-Men, the animated series, and Iron Man. He fought hard to keep the show stylish despite Fox Kids' censorship restrictions, including the infamous no punching rule. He's responsible for the show's cinematic pacing and frequent use of first-person Spidey POV shots. It was pretty unique for its time. Someone else is Alex Saviuk. He's a storyboard artist and character designer. He's a veteran Spider-Man comic book artist who helped translate comic-style visuals to the screen. He's known for his clean, dynamic art in the Web of Spider-Man comic and later the Amazing Spider-Man Sunday strip. So his influence really helped keep the animated Peter Parker feeling comic accurate. And I wanted to just say, hey, thanks for that. Here's a name that you might have heard of. Stan Berkowitz. writer, story editor, a major contributor to several episodes, especially during season 1. He went on to work on Justice League, Static Shock, Superman, and Batman Beyond. Stan Berkowitz. That's a hell of a resume there, man. And he's known for adding moral complexity and nuance to superhero stories. Obviously, because Spider-Man, Justice League, Superman, Batman Beyond, like that. Yeah, obviously, you are goated, Stan Berkowitz. Thank you very much. Mark Hoffmeyer, another writer and a co-story editor. He wrote and co-wrote tons of key episodes, including major arcs like the Alien Costume and Neogenic Nightmare. He helped build the serialized structure alongside Semper, making the show feel more like a comic book run than a typical Saturday morning show. Neogenic Nightmare, if that was actually like the way that they would serialize shows they made such an effort to serialize shows that oftentimes an entire season would be named like Neogenic Nightmare, and then another episode title here. And all like 10 episodes of that season would be Neogenic Nightmare, just to remind you, this is all one story. I think another one, another name like that they had was like Sins of Our Fathers or something like that. Sins of Our Fathers, episode 1. Spider-Man Returns, blah, blah. I forget the exact titles, but something like that. Just to really ingrain it that this is all one large story. Those are some people behind the scenes. In front of the scenes, like the voice cast, right off the bat, Christopher Daniel Barnes as Peter Parker / Spider-Man. He is our Spider-Man. He's the voice of our Spider-Man, all right? If Kevin Conroy is who we hear whenever we see Batman anywhere, then when we see Spider-Man, I'm pretty sure if you're anywhere near my age that you're hearing Christopher Daniel Barnes in your head. You know, by the way, he also is the voice of the prince in The Little Mermaid. Are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? That Hall of Fame, Christopher Daniel Barnes, Hall of Fame for you, my friend. Has to be, right? I should keep track of the Toonology Hall of Fame. And for sure, first ballot Hall of Fame inductee Kevin Conroy for Batman, right? And first ballot Hall of Famer Mark Hamill for Joker, right? Well, not just that, because guess who else is in this TV show? Mark Hamill as the Hobgoblin. So for sure, first ballot Hall of Famer Mark Hamill. Yep, the same Mark Hamill that played Luke Skywalker. The same Mark Hamill that played Joker. That dude also voiced Hobgoblin. It was like, if he wasn't more peak royalty for nerds back already, then he is now even more. First ballot Hall of Famer. Before I get into some more casting, some really like fun or famous voice cast members, I have to throw love to the most important cast members, perhaps, besides Peter Parker. Sarah Ballantyne, I believe is how you pronounce it. If not, it's Ballantine. And here's the thing. I've literally heard them pronounced both ways. I've seen videos where people call her Sarah Ballantyne, and I've seen videos where people call her Sarah Ballantine. So I don't know. I'm going to take a swing here. I'm going to say Ballantyne. Sarah Ballantyne as Mary Jane Watson. You know what I read recently? That originally it was going to be Catherine O'Hara as Mary Jane Watson, and that she might have even, I don't know if she recorded some test footage to show the networks, but when test footage was recorded, Catherine O'Hara was the name that was attached to Mary Jane. Now, Mary Jane wasn't in the pilot episode. I don't think she shows up to episode 3 anyways, but still, very interesting tidbit there. Almost played by Catherine O'Hara. Instead, it's Sarah Ballantyne, and I think she's basically the Mary Jane that we all hear as well. You know, like, there's no one more down for Peter Parker than Mary Jane. And that go get 'em, Tiger. I guarantee you, we're not thinking about Kirsten Dunst. We're thinking about Sarah Ballantyne. All right? Or Ballantine. Either way. And if MJ is the most down for Peter Parker, then the second most down is Aunt May. And shout out to Linda Gary for voicing Aunt May. Unfortunately, she passed away way back when the show was actually still like airing. So rest in peace, Aunt May, I guess. But I want to get into some of the more like famous and fun, more well-known cast members. I already got into perhaps the best, Mark Hamill. Here's my thing about Mark Hamill as Hobgoblin. And I think I blame Avi Arad for this. I think he might have been miscast. I think Mark Hamill was miscast, and it's not really, it's no one's fault except Avi Arad's probably, but hear me out. Hobgoblin was introduced in the animated series before Green Goblin only because Avi Arad and Toy Biz were releasing a Hobgoblin toy way before a Green Goblin toy. And this forced Hobgoblin to be introduced first in the animated series. And thus we have Mark Hamill as Hobgoblin. What if Avi Arad isn't such a greedy businessman and allows Green Goblin to come first? Is there a world where Mark Hamill could have been Green Goblin instead of Hobgoblin? Could Mark Hamill have been Norman Osborn? Is there a world where Mark Hamill could have voiced Norman Osborn and Green Goblin? That to me would have made, look, I love this TV show. There's two big gripes that I have with this TV show, really. One is this. I feel that Mark Hamill, we missed on Mark Hamill being cast as Green Goblin, and it's all because of Avi Arad. Now, look, maybe there's a interview somewhere out there that says no, that Mark Hamill was always going to be Hobgoblin, and there was never a chance that he could have been Green Goblin. Who knows? Maybe. Don't ruin this for me. In my head, he would have been Green Goblin if it weren't for a greedy businessman named Avi Arad. Okay? That's the way it is in my head. That's my head canon. Could have had it. I think. I don't know. Either way, he still did great as Hobgoblin. It's just that Hobgoblin as a character, nowhere near as memorable as Green Goblin. And look, we'll get to my list of Spider-Man's greatest villains. Mark Hamill is perhaps the greatest actor in this voice cast. Hobgoblin's not in my top 5. He's not even in my honorable mentions. Mark Hamill was wasted on Hobgoblin, if you ask me. Who else? Let's see. Oh, this one's cool. Hank Azaria played Eddie Brock and Venom. Longtime Simpsons legend. He plays Mo, Apu, Chief Wiggum, and probably like 30 other voices on the show. And also one of the best Venoms of all time. There may have been a problem with Apu, but I think that we're all pretty cool with Venom. So, is that okay to say? I don't even know. I swear to God, if 20 years from now, aliens come from outer space and they watch Spider-Man and get offended at Hank Azaria's portrayal of an alien symbiote, and one of those aliens makes a documentary called The Problem with Venom, I might lose it because I really love Venom from Spider-Man the Animated Series. But I'm open to, changing my mind. especially if it offends alien symbiotes. Let's keep going with some of the awesome voice cast. Ed Asner as J. Jonah Jameson. Yeah, that Ed Asner. He played Lou Grant on the Mary Tyler Moore Show. He was Santa in Elf, and he voiced Carl in Up, that movie that made you cry 5 minutes into the freaking story. He's legit an Emmy-winning TV actor, a legend, and perfectly voice cast as J. Jonah Jameson. He was so perfect. He's definitely who I hear of, the voice that I hear of the most. The only thing is that J.K. Simmons does such a great job of him too, that like now I kind of hear like this amalgamation of both voices. Here's something that I didn't know until doing research for this episode, and man, it blew me away. But David Hayter plays Captain America. And if you're not sure who that is, if you're a gamer, you might. David Hayter is the voice of Solid Snake in the Metal Gear in the Metal Gear Solid franchise. David Hayter is Snake, which also, by the way, means he was Geralt of Rivia in The Witcher. The Witcher series, The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt, The Witcher that went on to become the Netflix television show with Henry Cavill. David Hayter, he did Metal Gear Solid. He's Snake and he's Geralt. He's Metal Gear Solid and he's The Witcher, man. That's kind of nuts. And here in Spider-Man the Animated Series, he's Captain America. There's actually a fun little trivial fact that I learned very recently. In the episode with Captain America, he's in a couple of arcs. He's in the arc of 6 Forgotten Soldiers or 6 Forgotten Warriors, I forget. And then, no pun intended, I did forget. And then he comes back in the finale, which we'll talk about. The finale also has Mr. Fantastic. It has the entire Fantastic Four, but specifically Mr. Fantastic, he's voiced by this voice actor named Cam Clark. Why is this important? Cam Clark also voiced a character in the Metal Gear Solid franchise. He voiced Solid Snake's brother. Technically, they're both clones. It's a long story, really long story. Don't get me started. Either way, let's just say he plays Solid Snake's brother, and in a lot of ways, one of his greatest nemesis is Liquid Snake. So in an episode of Spider-Man the Animated Series, we have the voice of Solid Snake and Liquid Snake at the same time. That kind of blew my nerdy gamer mind. I don't know about you. Just wanted to bring that up. Keep going with this voice cast list. Roscoe Lee Brown, one of the dopest names I've ever said on this podcast, and one of the greatest actors I get to talk about. He played Kingpin. He's an acclaimed stage and screen actor. His voice was so regal and commanding. It elevated every scene. He had this Shakespearean background in real life that actually came through in his performances and really gave Kingpin that gravitas, in my opinion. I don't think that anyone has ever done Kingpin any justice until finally we see the portrayal now in the Daredevil series. Just kind of redefine it in a way. He's not, I guess, he doesn't have like this English accent anymore, but it's still cool, you know. But yeah, Roscoe Lee Brown, yeah, definitely, you know, may he rest in peace. Definitely so key in making Kingpin feel that important in the series. Now, I didn't think that I was going to want to really, I never thought the voice of Shocker was Shocker's voice was cool, but I never really thought about it too much until I researched a little bit, and I found out that Shocker was played by this guy, Jim Cummings. And you might think, all right, cool, good for him. Except, let me get into Jim Cummings' resume just a little bit, because he's one of the greatest voice actors of all time. Don't believe me? He's the voice of Winnie the Pooh. Let that soak in for a little bit, okay? Winnie the Pooh's been around for like ever, right? There was one person that originated the voice, and then for the next like 40 years, it's been Jim Cummings. Winnie the Pooh. Chances are, if you heard Winnie the Pooh somewhere, you heard Jim Cummings' version. Winnie the Pooh. What are you gonna say? Like, his side gig was Bugs Bunny? No, I know that's Mel Blanc, but still, Winnie the Pooh. And I know you might be thinking, all right, Winnie the Pooh, that's classic, but it's not. I don't know how cool Winnie the Pooh is. Well, hold up, because then he throws a curveball in there. And he's like, yeah, how about Darkwing Duck? Yeah, no, he doesn't voice some character in Darkwing Duck. No, he voices Darkwing Duck. The Duck with the dark wing. Him, the main character. Darkwing Duck. Ding, ding. Where's it? When there's trouble, he's there on the double. I don't know, something like that. Darkwing Duck. Something like that. That's him. Not singing it, but they're singing about him. It was nuts. And now he's Shocker. He's also Peg Leg Pete, which I had to Google, but you definitely know who Peg Leg Pete is. You know, Goofy in Disney. Think of Goofy's like nemesis. It's always like this big, bulky, chubby looking bully. That's Peg Leg Pete. Pretty sure he's in a Goofy movie doing something, but yeah, he voiced that too. Just throwing that out there. Someone else I want to give love to, Jennifer Hale as Felicia Hardy in Black Cat. You know, I didn't realize this till recently. Felicia Hardy is basically Gwen Stacy. It was supposed to be Gwen Stacy. They didn't use Gwen Stacy specifically. I think the reasoning behind it was because Gwen Stacy famously dies in the comics, and I believe they didn't want people or viewers to know or think or believe that this character was going to meet some untimely end at some point. So they just made the character Felicia Hardy and gave her, new stories like turning into Black Cat and all that stuff. And, you don't really see Felicia Hardy talked about. Now it's always just MJ and Gwen Stacy, but Felicia Hardy in the cartoon, she was pretty cool. There was a lot of times where when MJ was like angry at Peter, you were like, yeah, go with Felicia. She's pretty cool too. What the hell? She ends up becoming Black Cat in a pretty cool storyline too. Here's the cool thing about Jennifer Hale. She's really big in the video game scene. She's the voice of Mass Effect's Commander Shepard. And what I thought was pretty awesome, she's Metroid Samus. She's the voice of Metroid. Metroid Prime 1, 2, 3, and Trilogy, she's Samus. Even though that character like rarely speaks, when she does, it's important, and that voice is entrusted to her. Jennifer Hale. I thought that was pretty cool. I wanted to quickly mention Richard Mole, who plays Scorpion. Really for no other reason than the fact that he's also Two-Face in Batman the Animated Series. So that's pretty dope. He was also in Night Court back in the day as a character named Bull, but really I wanted to talk about Two-Face for a little bit. And to kind of wrap up my spotlight on the voice cast, Don Stark, the voice of Rhino. The only reason that you're probably going to know who this guy is, he's Bob from That 70s Show, which I thought was pretty freaking funny. The idea that Bob from That 70s Show is Rhino kind of Perfect, right? Like, yeah, that kind of tracks, actually. It kind of makes sense. Thank you to Tony Pastor or Pastor. I think it's Pastor. I don't know. Not a household name like Andrea Romano, but Tony Pastor handled voice direction for the entire Spider-Man the Animated Series run. His job was to cast the right actors for each role, and I think for the most part he did it, except for freaking Mark Hamill not being Green Goblin. And he directed all the recording sessions. He would guide the actors in tone, emotion, pacing, and continuity across all episodes, and he had to balance a massive rotating cast of heroes and villains while keeping performances consistent on a brand for Saturday morning cartoons. That was no small feat. So thank you to Tony Pastor. That was pretty awesome, man. Before I get into some of the episodes, I think it's important to talk about a little something like this. Oh, great! Did I mute everything? Oh, that was dumb. All right, let me try that again. All right, I think let's talk about a little something like this. Spider-Man, Spider-Man, Spider-Man. Now, apparently, this is supposed to sound like Spider-Man, Spider-Man, but this is such a man. As a kid, I remember thinking this song was pretty awesome and cool, man. This was cool. It went hard, and look, is this song iconic? I think so. I think it's pretty iconic. For different reasons than, let's say the Batman song, which is also pretty darned iconic in its own way. This song, it's obviously more intense. It has more energy. It's more 90s for sure. It was actually done by Joe Perry, the Joe Perry from Aerosmith. I think you can tell if you don't hear that guitar. That was the worst version of the guitar ever. The hell was that? I don't know what I was thinking. Anyways, I'm powering through it. It's chaotic, aggressive, and like I said, very of its time. The vocals just say Spider-Man, Spider-Man, radioactive Spider-Man. That's better than what I did. What the hell was that? That was my first attempt. Stupid idiot. Anyways, it was awesome. Joe Perry. We had Joe Perry to thank for that. I probably had no idea who Aerosmith was back then, but looking back at it, that was pretty cool. So thank you, Joe Perry. That's really all I wanted to say about that. Like, I mean, the music from show to show, like there was scores done, and there was an orchestral score, I should say. It definitely wasn't as iconic as Batman the Animated Series, but it was more. It kind of was more in the background, but definitely laid the mood for everything. I mean, I remember Mary Jane had her own song, and it sounded a little like a soap opera or a romantic scene was about to happen. And then, I think Jay Jonah had his own song. Whenever there was a bad guy, they had their own song and stuff like that. But really, Joe Perry and that intro, that's when you think of Spider-Man, the Animated Series music, that's what you think of, in my opinion, in my humble opinion. And you know what? I'm the host, so that's what it's going to be. Now let's get to something. This is where I start having, not that none of this is fun. I find all of this fun, but this is where I start to, I like ranking stuff. I don't know. What is it about people, nerds, and ranking stuff? I like ranking stuff. So I wanted to talk about the characters of the show. I already went into the voice cast, but let's get into the characters and specific episodes. And what better way to do that than by ranking them? I want to talk about Spider-Man's friends, his allies, his villains, the episodes, and we're gonna do this all right now. And the first one, let's get into his top 5 allies. Who are Spider-Man's top 5 allies in Spider-Man the Animated Series specifically? Now, I made default winners, plural. Mary Jane and Aunt May are the default winners of the greatest allies, period. Because no one's more down for Peter Parker than Mary Jane or Aunt May. Doesn't matter what, they will always have Peter Parker's back. That's just the way it is. So they are the default winners. I don't care what you say. Besides that, though, let's get down to the top 5 allies of Spider-Man in this show. Now, before I give you the list, I do want to say I have another list of people that start off as villains and then become allies. So if you don't see someone in this top 5 list, they might come in just a couple of minutes. But my top 5 allies for Spider-Man, number 5, the X-Men. Like literally all of the X-Men. Is that kind of a hack? Is that kind of a cheat? Maybe, but so be it. When I'm talking about greatest allies, I'm talking about how big of a help they were to Spider-Man, how much time they spent together, and how often he relied on them, The X-Men come in a 2-part episode, which we will talk about shortly. And at first it's mostly Beast and Wolverine that he interacts with, but he does interact with Professor X, Cyclops, Jean Grey, Storm, Gambit, Rogue, Jubilee, the whole team. And, together they basically free Beast and help out, help the mutant agenda, which is the name of the episode. But unfortunately, they can't help Spider-Man with his mutation. He seeks out the X-Men because he's afraid that he's going to mutate into this 6th-armed spider monster and be unable to control his monster mind in a way. And eventually the Professor X tells Peter Parker that he can't really help him because the X-Men don't believe in curing mutations. When Spider-Man asks for help because this mutation is taking over him little by little, he sees it as a curse, the X-Men almost take offense to that and end up not helping Spider-Man in a way. And Spider-Man actually kind of feels betrayed by them. So either way, before that, I guess, feeling of betrayal, we do get them forming a pretty cool team. So I've got them here as a number 5 greatest ally. Maybe I should have mentioned some honorable mentions first. I'll save it for the end. Whatever. Number 4 on my list of the greatest allies, Blade. Yeah, Blade. Looking like you. Trying to, what is it? Ice skate uphill in the summer? I don't even know. I messed that one up. Anyways, yeah, Blade's really cool in this animated series. And he comes back for 2 different arcs. So I'm definitely going to put him in there. Blade is in there with Whisker, and is that his name? Whisker? Anyways, we learn about Blade's origin, his upbringing, all of it. It's pretty cool. It's definitely the first I ever was exposed to Blade, and I think it played a huge role in the Blade movie being made eventually. So yeah, Blade is a awesome character that I'm going to get into a little bit more when we talk about awesome episodes. Number 3, best ally for Spider-Man in the animated series, the Punisher, Frank Castle. Heck yeah. This one was funny because how do you do the Punisher in a show that has like zero violence? Well, right off the start, Punisher's told by I forgot the name of the guy that runs, that helps plan Punisher's battles and all that. But anyways, the Punisher comes into the show using non-lethal rounds for everything, because apparently he's had like some bad press, and it would help to bring down Spider-Man, because at this time he's the crowd thinks, the audience thinks, unfortunately, that he's been a part of some evil doings when actually it wasn't him at all. But anyways, long story short, they bring in Punisher. With his battle van and everything, with his cool headband and the skull logo. Punisher, even though he couldn't kill the way that he would probably want to in all of his comics, he looked pretty cool in the TV show. And definitely cool enough to put on this list. And he helped Spider-Man multiple times as well. And I'll get into that a little bit later too. So the Punisher, not just on this list for looking cool and badass. No, he's on the list for being a good ally. To him and Blade end up working together, believe it or not, in an awesome episode. They're both awesome examples of like the reluctant ally anti-hero in a way. They actually both try to hunt down Spider-Man at one point, but realize no, he's not the bad guy. So he's here as an ally. Number 2 greatest ally to Spider-Man, Daredevil, or perhaps more accurately, Matt Murdock, because Matt Murdock plays Peter Parker's lawyer, and Daredevil fights behind the scenes for Peter Parker. And to prove Peter Parker's innocence. And it's Spider-Man who helps Daredevil, because Spider-Man is a friend of Peter Parker, and he's going to help Daredevil. So because Daredevil's fighting on behalf of Matt Murdock for Peter Parker. It's a bunch of stuff going on here, but seeing Matt Murdock and Daredevil both on screen portrayed so well, the idea of Matt Murdock fighting to prove Peter Parker's innocence while Spider-Man and Daredevil fight together. Hey, there's actually a scene where they fight each other, and that's pretty awesome. And you can almost see that Daredevil might have Spider-Man's number, and maybe even quite easily too, which is it's something to think about. Would Daredevil beat Spider-Man in a fight? Spider-Man is definitely stronger, but maybe Daredevil's, I don't know, something about his ability to see and sense things might be better than Spider-Man's Spidey sense. Who knows? Anyways, I've got Matt Murdock, Daredevil, here at number 2. And the number 1 best ally for Spider-Man in the cartoon, I have it as Black Cat, Felicia Hardy, because I believe that of all these allies, Black Cat helps Spider-Man the most, in the most episodes, throughout the most story arcs, in the most ways. And not only that, there's always been that romantic will they or won't they between Spider-Man and Black Cat, as there was between Peter Parker and Felicia Hardy. So it's the fact that their relationship they've always been friends. You can say maybe Felicia at first starts that kind of uses Peter Parker as a study buddy more than anything else, but there's a genuine friendship there. And there's definitely a camaraderie there as Spider-Man and Black Cat. And just because, like, here, I've got like X-Men on this list, and they were there for all of 2 episodes, unless you count the finale and you have Storm. But Black Cat, there's probably over a dozen episodes where Black Cat is helping Spider-Man, and even more with Felicia Hardy. So that's why I've got her as the number 1 ally for Spider-Man. Now, honorable mentions. These are basically on the list because there's some awesome names. Captain America, Iron Man and War Machine, Doctor Strange and Wong, Nick Fury and S.H.I.E.L.D. All of these people were also on Spider-Man the Animated Series. And I mean, that's so, just look at that list of guest appearances in a way, you know? You've got helping out Spider-Man, you've got Black Cat, Daredevil, Punisher, Blade, the X-Men, Captain America, Iron Man, War Machine, Doctor Strange, Wong, Nick Fury, Shield. The entire Fantastic Four come in at one point. That's kind of nuts. That's kind of nuts. And you know what's might be even more nuts than all those allies is that Spider-Man has one of the greatest villains gallery, rogues gallery of all time. I would argue the second greatest villains rogues gallery of all time behind only Spider-Man. Behind only Batman. Pause for editing and continue. Yeah, I don't think that any hero in all of media has better villains than Spider-Man except for Batman. That's it. Nobody else. And that's saying something, in my opinion. And that's a huge reason why Spider-Man is as popular as he is. It's because he's, you know, they say it in wrestling, to have a great hero, you need a great villain. And I think that's a big reason why if you ask people who's the greatest hero in DC history, it's probably Batman. And if you ask people who's the greatest hero in Marvel history, you're probably going to get a lot of people that say Spider-Man. That's just what I think. And I don't think it's any secret or that happened because of them having such an awesome rogues gallery. So let's get into who the top 5 villains in Spider-Man the Animated Series are. And remember, this doesn't mean that I think they're his greatest villains in general, like in all of Spider-Man lore. No. I mean, in this cartoon, in this TV show, some honorable mentions. For top villains in Spider-Man, I've got to mention people like Mysterio, Scorpion, Rhino, Shocker, Chameleon, and Electro. Everyone besides Electro they're on the honorable mentions list because they're really well-known, popular villains that have been around that were in a lot of episodes, but all of them kind of have this bumbling inability to execute. And I don't mean kill, I mean to just execute a plan properly, you know? Rhino, it was his greatest flaw is always his lack of intelligence. Same for Scorpion. Shocker was never really known as a smart guy either, but he was held back by that, and also his Shocker blasts, gauntlets, whatever, were, you know, he couldn't get them wet. Mysterio, he's they explained that his powers came from special effects. I mean, okay, cool. He looks great, and back when you were a kid, we didn't really question those hollow cubes, but now thinking about it, special effects, I don't get it. Okay, he still looks awesome, and I still really like him. I think they did a great job kind of modernizing him in Spider-Man Far From Home with Jake Gyllenhaal, and they used drone technology to explain a lot of the hallucinations that were happening. It wasn't special effects, but still, it still takes a little bit of that suspense of belief in a way, you know. Either way, and then I have Electro as an honorable mention because he's really strong and powerful, but he's basically just in like one episode. So, top 5 villains. At number 5, believe it or not, I've got Dr. Doom. Dr. Doom was a Spider-Man villain, technically, in the Secret Wars story arc in the final season. Now, he wasn't in it very many episodes, similar to, you know, Electro. But the reason I am putting Dr. Doom in my top 5, one, because he's freaking Dr. Doom, which is like awesome. He's one of the most awesome villains in everything. in all mediums and everything. Dr. Doom. So why not have him on this list? And I mean, he was a pretty big foe or nemesis in the Secret Wars storyline here of Spider-Man. So why not? At number 4, top 5 villains, I've got Carnage, Cletus Cassidy. Because I thought that they did a really good job portraying that, unlike pretty much every other villain in Spider-Man the Animated Series, there was no saving Cletus Cassidy. There was no salvation for him. It didn't seem like there was any humanity left in him. Even in this kids show that was very nerfed, we kind of got that this guy is evil. Everyone else, even Kingpin a little bit, it is not pure evil. This guy Carnage, they don't want to be saved, can't save him, just can't. There's no saving that guy. That's why I've got him at number 4. And you got to remember, he's actually, in a way, Carnage, not Cletus Cassidy, but Carnage is, in a way, the final villain of the entire thing. Don't remember? Don't worry. I'll talk about it soon. Number 3 in the top 5 villains in Spider-Man the Animated Series, Dr. Octopus. Yeah, that guy. Otto Octavius, the leader of the Insidious Six, not the Sinister Six, because... kids. Yeah, even the word sinister was apparently too mean to say. Dr. Octopus, I love that he's the intellect that he is, the leader of the Six, the Insidious Six, and always a strong foe for Spider-Man. In real life, he's probably my number 1 or number 2 Spider-Man villain. That in the cartoon, I got him at number 3. Only because at number 2, I have Green Goblin. And Green Goblin is probably my number 1 or number 2 normally, but in the animated series, I've got him at number 2. He'd probably be at number 1 if Avi Arad would have let John Semper Jr. use Green Goblin first from the start instead of Hobgoblin, because he had to sell a toy. And maybe that would have allowed them to cast Mark Hamill as Green Goblin and not as Hobgoblin, who isn't even on this list. But no. And maybe if all that would have happened, I can pretty much guarantee that Green Goblin would have been number 1 on my list. But instead, he's number 2. Because even though I'm complaining and all this stuff, he still is one of the greatest foes in Peter Parker for Peter Parker throughout the 5 seasons. He causes the most anguish and strife because he leads to the disappearance of Mary Jane. And, for that, there's really no way to ever forgive him if you're Peter Parker. And not only that, he, as Norman Osborn, he drives a wedge between him and between Peter Parker and Harry, and Norman Osborn actually figures out Peter Parker's identity. That's huge, and it's portrayed in like a dinner scene, which was made later homaged in the real life live action movies. But yeah, Green Goblin. I've got him here as my number 2 villain for Spider-Man in the animated series. In real life, probably 1. Who do I have as my number 1 villain? It's Kingpin. It's Wilson Fisk. Because from the very beginning, we see that Wilson Fisk, it will stop at pretty much nothing. It's his number 1 goal to rid himself of Spider-Man. So many other villains are put in Spider-Man's way because of Kingpin. The entire Insidious Six storyline happens because Kingpin funds them. He gives them all the job. The entire reason that Insidious Six goes down is because of Kingpin. You got to remember, Alistair Smythe the Spider Slayers, all those Spider Slayer robots, which I'm not a huge fan of. You see, Alistair Smythe is not on my top villains or honorable mentions either, but he's employed by Kingpin, and he's a huge part of the show. In fact, Alistair Smythe and his Spider Slayers are the first villains, really, that you see. Technically, the Lizard is up there, as in the pilot episode, but it's all about the Spider Slayers for 2 straight episodes after that. I don't even care about them, but that's because Kingpin is paying Alistair Smythe to make all this happen. Kingpin is involved in the Tablet of Time story arcs that brings in Silvermane and Vulture and Hammerhead and all that stuff. He's just involved in so much. He's involved in trying to, or effectively framing Peter Parker. So he's not just Spider-Man's nemesis, he's Peter Parker's nemesis. He frames him in the Daredevil Matt Murdock storyline. I mean, Kingpin's just got his fingerprints all over every single season of the animated series. That I've got to make Kingpin my number one villain for Peter Parker and Spider-Man in the Spider-Man animated series line here in the 90s. So, and then my last list of characters before I wrap it up with talking about my favorite episodes. I've got a special list here. I don't know how often I'll be able to have a list like this. I'll always have heroes and villains, for the most part. But here, because the cool thing about Peter Parker is that he always believed in the good in people. And because of that belief that people are intrinsically good, he was able to turn a lot of villains into allies. And I've got the top 5 times that he did that. Top 5 villains turned allies in Spider-Man the Animated Series. Number 5, we've got the Prowler, Hubie Brown. Now, the Prowler has gained a lot more fame in more recent times because of the Miles Morales Spider-Verse, but that's a different version of the Prowler. Not this Hobie Brown. Hobie Brown is not Miles Morales' uncle. He's just a guy. He's just some other dude. He's an inventor that uses his inventions for stealing, and it's not until Peter Parker and until Spider-Man battles the Prowler that he's able to convince Hobie to leave his villainous ways behind, and he becomes a good guy. Actually, I think he just decides to not be the Prowler at all anymore, instead of actually fighting for good, but whatever. The Prowler costume looked really cool when I was a kid. I thought looked really cool when I was a kid, and I'm still not mad at it. Now, number 4. Number 4, villain turned ally, Michael Morbius. Who would have thought that this character would end up having his own movie? But this is the world we live in. Michael Morbius started off as this weird student rival of Peter Parker's that then was turned into Morbius kind of because of Peter Parker in a way. It was a little bit his fault, and Peter Parker does blame himself for Morbius's transformation into essentially a vampire. He was all about needing plasma, and he had pores on his hands that he would suck the plasma out. Now, I used to think that it was plasma instead of blood because of standards and practices, but apparently in the comics, it was a focus on plasma over blood as well, because at the time there was this pushback about vampires being used in there was something called the Comics Code of Ethics that was trying to enforce that comics, be more suitable for children, and somehow vampires weren't allowed unless they were more scientific in base, and so that's how Morbius was allowed to be used is because he was like a scientific experiment gone wrong instead of like Dracula and I suck your blood. So it was plasma based in the comics. However, he did have fangs and used them in the comics, whereas in the cartoon, he has fangs just to smile at you with while he drains your plasma through his palms. That, because kids. Either way, it's Felicia Hardy that's able to convince Spider-Man to save Morbius and to help him instead of beat him up, I guess. And Morbius comes back later on, being controlled by the Vampire Queen, and it's actually it's actually Blade and Punisher that team up with Spider-Man to help him. And then, so Morbius, villain turned ally for Spider-Man. Number 3, best villain turned ally, I'm going to say Kraven the Hunter. And it's crazy because had it not been for Spider-Man the Animated Series, Kraven would probably be one of the most vicious villains in Spider-Man history, simply for the Kraven the Last Hunt comic storyline, where he basically beats Spider-Man, proves to himself that he can beat Spider-Man, and then let's just say that comic has a very, very dark ending. And because this might have children watching, that's all I'm going to say about that. But in the TV show, the animated series, Kraven is actually turns out being good, and it's more because of his love for Calypso. His Calypso, what was her name? Crawford? Dr. Crawford, who is Kraven the Hunter, Sergei Kravinoff's love interest. And she's the one that turned Kraven into, the Hunter. But she pleads with Spider-Man that there's still good in him. And Spider-Man believes that. And Kraven and Spider-Man at one point end up working together to save Dr. Crawford from someone even more evil. So Kraven can play good, and he does so with Spider-Man. And I don't know, something about good guy Kraven really, really kind of tickles my fancy. So I've got him here at number 3. My number 2 top villain turned ally, Venom. I've got Venom here because I really, really enjoy the way that they work together. Listen, the Venom I thought was going to be his biggest villain, but then there's a story arc where Venom teams up with Spider-Man and with Iron Man and War Machine, kind of, to take on Carnage. Because that's how crazy and messed up Carnage is, that even Venom will team up with Spider-Man to take out Carnage. And the most amazingly selfless thing is that that Eddie Brock, he falls in love with this psychiatrist that's trying to help her, or to help him, who doesn't believe that the Venom is real. He thinks it's just a fractured psyche of Eddie Brock, but then she sees firsthand that Venom is real, and Eddie Brock ends up sacrificing himself to save his new love interest. So when we see that selflessness and that sacrifice from Eddie Brock, from Venom, it really shows that there is a humanity to Eddie Brock, and it was in this animated show that we got to really see that. And it's because of that we can look at somebody like Tom Hardy and actually believe that he is the hero of this Venom trilogy, which I actually kind of liked. I don't know about you, but I kind of like most things. Anyways. And the number 1 villain turned ally, the original, the one in the pilot episode, the Lizard, Dr. Kurt Connors. He was a bad guy at first, and it was because Spider-Man, Peter Parker, is so smart. He was able to kind of realize that it's an experiment gone terribly wrong, and he's able to help Dr. Connors reach human form once again, and returns him to his family, his wife and his kid. Dr. Connors ends up becoming one of Peter Parker's greatest allies and greatest friends, as he, not just Peter Parker, but also to Spider-Man. He ends up trying to help him during his, sixth arm stuff, all that stuff. And he really, he goes to fight for Spider-Man in many ways, including in the finale. Lizard is actually one of the bad guys at first, and then they're actually able to get Kurt Connors' mind into the Lizard's body, and the Lizard can speak and think just like Kurt Connors, and then fights alongside Spider-Man as the Lizard, proving that from episode 1 to pretty much the final story arc, the Lizard, although once bad, will always be one of Spider-Man's greatest allies. And with that, we come to the grand finale, what it's all about. And that's these specific television episodes, man. And here's the thing I've been talking about all episode long, all podcast episode long. Spider-Man was all about continuity, storylines, story arcs. So I'm not going to do this as just individual episodes. These are my top 5 greatest story arcs, not just episodes, but arcs. Top 5 story arcs in Spider-Man, the animated series. Some of my honorable mentions: The Vampire Queen and the Awakening in season 4, episodes 7 and 8. It's where Morbius returns under the control of the Vampire Queen, and Blade and Punisher and Black Cat all work together with Spider-Man to get Morbius out from under the vampire's control and rid New York City of the Vampire Queen. It ends with Blade and Morbius actually teaming up and going after the Vampire Queen themselves, which is kind of an awesome team up that I'd like to see. Another honorable mention. Oh, by the way, Spider-Man, Morbius, Blade, Punisher, Black Cat. That sounds like a really awesome version of the Marvel Knights. That's why I have this episode up here. Another one, The Six Forgotten Warriors, a 5-part episode that involves Captain America, Red Skull, Electro, Chameleon, and then the Forgotten Warriors. Besides Captain America, you got Miss America, Black Marvel, the Destroyer, the Thunderer, and the Wizard. I believe most of those are based on real characters except for the Thunderer. I don't know. Anyways, top 5 story arcs. Number 5, Venom Returns and Carnage. Season 3, episode 9 and 10. I discussed it just a couple of seconds ago, but Venom and Carnage are in this episode, along with Iron Man, War Machine, and Dormammu. This is when Venom and Spider-Man actually team up to take on Carnage. They fight alongside Iron Man and War Machine at a time too. And they take on Carnage, who's actually working for Dormammu at this point. You know what's so cool about this is that, do you remember like those Spider-Man Venom video games, like Separation Anxiety? That's how awesome the team up between Spider-Man and Venom was. That's why I had Venom as such a high-ranking ally, and that's why I've got this episode up here. Number 4, I've got the Insidious 6, season 2, episodes 1 and 2. I mean, it's the Sinister Six, man. It's the most, probably, like, besides the Legion of Doom, is the Sinister Six not perhaps the most iconic group of villains in all of comic book history? Like I said, besides Legion of Doom. I don't know. We could probably talk about that, but as a kid, the Sinister Six was it for me, man. Or Insidious 6. That's Dr. Octopus, Rhino, Shocker, Scorpion, Mysterio, and the Chameleon. And like I said, all funded by Kingpin. Loved that episode. Number 3, on my top 5 story arcs, The Mutant Agenda and Mutants Revenge, season 2, episode 4 and 5, where Peter Parker where Spider-Man seeks the help of the X-Men in trying to help him cure himself of the mutagen that will soon turn him into a monstrous spider. But this is when he learns that the X-Men don't view mutants as mutagens. I don't know. They don't view mutants as a curse. And they're almost offended when Spider-Man seeks a cure, and Peter Parker leaves feeling almost abandoned by the X-Men, even though they just went into battle together. It's a deep episode that really, talks about the two sides of the mutant agenda, pro mutant, when you accept the mutant abilities as a gift and when you fear them as a curse. My number 2 favorite story arc from this series, Framed and the Man Without Fear, season 3, episodes 11 and 12. Matt Murdock defends a framed Peter Parker who's being framed by Kingpin. Daredevil and Spider-Man fight each other and then fight together, all to defend Peter Parker's innocence. This right here is why everyone's begging that the next Spider-Man movie involve Daredevil and Punisher. We want to see the street team back in action. And if you want that in the movies now, it's probably because you remember something from this episode. We don't get Daredevil in cartoon form, man. This is it. Daredevil would make an awesome cartoon. And this is all we got. These 2 episodes. We'll take it. And in my opinion, the number 1, the best story arc in the animated series, in Spider-Man the animated series, it's the alien costume 3-part series or 3-part arc, season 1, episode 8, 9, and 10. It's the introduction of Venom. We get Rhino here, we get Shocker, and we get Black Suit Spider-Man. It's all in this 3-part series. The origin of Venom, how Peter Parker gets the black suit, how he realizes that he has to get rid of it. It's all here, and I don't think there's any episode of the series that I remember more from my childhood than the episodes involving Venom, specifically these 3. So, the alien costume, season 1, I've got that as my greatest story in Spider-Man cartoon history. And just because I don't really like harping on the negative too much, I will give you my top 5 worst stories, but we're just going to run through them. My number 5 worst story arc, The Spot. I never liked The Spot and his interdimensional stuff. I was really surprised that the Spider-Verse movie chose him as the villain, but it makes a lot of sense for the story that they have to portray and tell. And if anything, that's the greatest portrayal of the Spot I've ever seen, because in this animated show, he was just kind of annoying. And the fact that he led to one of the weirdest stories of all time involving Mary Jane's disappearance, it just leaves a bad taste in my mouth. Number 4 worst story arc, Cyber Slayers, and kind of anything with Alistair Smythe. As I said before, I just don't care about the spiders, the Super Slayers, the Spider Slayers. I don't care about robots that are meant to destroy Spider-Man. And when Alistair Smith himself becomes a Spider Slayer mutant or whatever, I just don't care. The number 3 worst story arc, the Mary Jane water clone saga, whatever. Ugh. Look, I don't mind Hydro Man. I thought the first Hydro Man episode was pretty good, or when he comes back, it's actually still pretty good until the very end, because we realize how powerful Hydro Man can be, and man, he is actually crazy powerful. But the ending of that story has Mary Jane also getting the Hydro Man powers, so she's now able to control water and whatnot. But then she dies, but then we learn it's not the real Mary Jane, and that it was a clone of Mary Jane for all of season 4. Mary Jane disappears in a portal that Green Goblin, was responsible for, that the Spot invented, and then she randomly returns without explanation a couple of episodes later. And then for an entire season, by the way, they get married. And then for an entire season, they live married as husband and wife until we learn in this episode that it's actually been a clone and the real Mary Jane is still gone. Hated it. I hated it even more because she never came back. And I'll get into that. But she never came back, man. Number 2, worst story arc. Rocket Racer. Big wheel. All that. It's the worst villain that they have on the show, period. Rocket Racer or the Rocket Racing Gang. It's some gang that with a guy in a gyroscopic wheel. Oh my God. It's not even worth talking about. You'll hopefully never see it ever again in any form or whatever. But yeah, that's the dumbest villain, Rocket Racer. And my least favorite story arc, Make-A-Wish, Attack of the Octobot. It's this storyline where Peter Parker is questioning whether he should continue being Spider-Man, and he befriends a little girl and tells this little girl everything, his entire life story. It's actually the episode where we get Spider-Man's origin, and that's kind of cool. And it does have Dr. Octopus. However, it's Dr. Octopus controlling an Octobot and not really Dr. Octopus himself, which is annoying. But anyways, I don't care about the kid. I don't know. Is that me? Am I a bad person? I don't care about that kid. Taina. I don't care about Taina. I care about Mary Jane. And I care about Felicia Hardy and Eddie Brock and Aunt May and J. Jonah Jameson. I don't care about Taina. Make-A-Wish kid. And in the craziest scene in all of Spider-Man, the animated series, Spider-Man tells this little girl his deepest, darkest secret. That Spider-Man is Peter Parker. And she says, I'll keep that secret for the rest of my life. And then Spider-Man says, cool, and swings away. And that's when we zoom out and see that Spider-Man was visiting this girl in a hospital for the terminally ill. Taina's dying. When it says Make-A-Wish, it's because she's a Make-A-Wish kid. She's going to die. And Spider-Man's like, I don't know why I trust you. Maybe because you're not going to live any longer, but I'm Peter Parker. And this poor girl's like, I'm going to keep that secret for the rest of my life, which is about 2 more hours. That's how it ends. And guess what? Taina never comes back. Want to know why? Because she's dead. She's dead. Okay? I'm sorry. I'm supposed to say unalived. This girl was unalived. There you go. Dead. Whatever. Number 1, worst. Hated it. I don't care. I was a kid and I don't want the kid in there. Get the kids out of there. I don't want kids, man. And that's my top 5 worst. Now, do you notice something that in my top 5 best story arcs and top 5 worst, you know what was missing from that? The entire finale. Because I really don't know how I feel about the finale. Do I love it? Not really. Do I hate it? Not really. That's why I didn't put it in any of those lists. So I guess I got to talk about it now. And what better place to talk about the finale than at the end of this episode? The finale took place, obviously, during season 5, episodes 9, 10, 11, 12, and 13. After 5 seasons of personal loss, alien goo, vampire mutants, time travel, and about 37 million rooftop chases, Spider-Man the Animated Series goes out with a finale that is both epic and existential, but I don't know. It was like left me wanting more. And that's probably because There should have been more. But apparently, Fox Kids had a new person in charge, and that person was not a big fan of Avi Arad. And go figure. Probably because Avi Arad sucks. He apparently was egotistical, bombastic, rude. And, you know, the new head of animation for Fox Kids, who happened to be a woman, probably saw right through Avi Arad's BS and said, nah, I don't want to work with you anymore. Which is crazy because of how much money Spider-Man the cartoon was making at the time, but that's got to tell you how much Avi Arad sucks. They wanted another season. The story didn't end. It didn't end. But they knew that the show wasn't getting picked up for season 6, so they did have a finale. They just had to end things a little bit differently than they had planned. It ended with Secret Wars in a way, kind of. Secret Wars was episodes 9, 10, and 11, and it involved a mysterious godlike figure named the Beyonder that transports Spider-Man to a distant battle planet. I think it was called Battle Planet, if I'm not mistaken. Why? It was just to basically test Spider-Man, to test whether good can truly triumph over evil, allegedly at first. Essentially, Madam Web and the Beyonder, they bring him to Battle World and they tell Spider-Man that you can choose like 5 allies or something like that to fight with you against Doctor Doom and the greatest evils. And he chooses Captain America, Iron Man, the Fantastic Four, and Black Cat. Oh, and Storm. And it was weird. It always annoyed me that like Storm is just randomly there, because basically they wanted the X-Men, but you can't have all of the X-Men. That was apparently the problem. They couldn't have all of the X-Men, so they had to choose one. Why it wasn't Wolverine, I don't know, but they chose Storm. And it's weird because you get all of the Fantastic Four, which, by the way, were not in a single episode at all until this one. But they're in there. They're awesome. They're great, but they're in there. So Captain America, Iron Man, the Fantastic Four, Black Cat, Storm. I mean, it sounds awesome, right? That he's teaming up with all of them and they're taking on the Doctor Doom, Red Skull, Lizard. That sounds awesome. It just, I don't know, it felt a little rushed and out of nowhere. You got to remember, this is basically all the Madam Web stuff. It's leading to this. And I remember just feeling like, okay, this is cool that we're seeing all these people, but I don't know. I didn't realize it then, but it's because it didn't feel earned, in my opinion. Now, Secret Wars comes to an end. They defeat Doctor Doom and all that stuff, but there's still 2 more episodes. These are the Spider Wars. Just when he thinks he's going home, Spider-Man is thrust into one final mission. He must stop an alternate version of himself, Spider Carnage. A Peter Parker consumed by the rage and bonded with the Carnage symbiote. Now, that's why Secret Wars bothers me a little bit, because the only reason that Secret Wars takes place in Spider-Man, the animated series, is to test Spider-Man and prepare him for his actual greatest test. Are you with me? Madam Web puts Spider-Man through Secret Wars just to test him and see if he can actually take on his biggest threat. So Secret Wars is just a test. That's why it leaves a little bit of a bad taste in my mouth. Secret Wars is just a test for essentially the introduction of the Spider-Verse. It's a test so that he can take on Spider Carnage. That's what it is. And in the last 2 episodes, Spider-Man teams up with an armored Spider-Man, the 6-armed Spider-Man, a Scarlet Spider variant, a billionaire version of Peter Parker, and a Peter Parker that just plays Spider-Man as an actor with no actual powers. And John Semper Jr. actually said that a reason that he put all these Spider-Men in the finale is because he used to feel bad when as a kid, he would buy an action figure, but then never see the action figure on the TV show. And Avi Arad was selling toys of Spider-Man that never appeared on the TV show. So John Semper Jr., so that these kids wouldn't feel like crap for wondering, hey, I never saw this armored Spider-Man, which, by the way, I had as a kid. Well, he made this episode and said, here's your armored Spider-Man, kid. And thank you, John Semper Jr., for that, for basically trying to fix Avi Arad's bullcrap. Either way, we got it here, and all the Spider-Men work together in a way to try to take out Spider Carnage in an alternate universe. This is, again, another reason why this leaves a bad taste in my mouth. You're telling me 5 seasons of Spider-Man and all the Madam Web crap, all of that was to lead to a Secret Wars story that meant nothing. It was just a test on a battle world. And that was all just a test so that Spider-Man can leave the world that we were in for 5 seasons and battle an alternate universe version of himself in a world that we've never seen before. And that's how the show ends. Well, that's the last episode. In the final scene, Spider-Man goes to the world of the actor Spider-Man. The Spider-Man that has no powers. In his world, he's just an actor. And his character was created by Stan Lee. So the Peter Parker that we all know and love, the real Spider-Man, he visits that world and he talks and meets with Stan Lee. And Spider-Man swings around with Stan Lee. And I guess there's some people out there that think that's a great ending. Spider-Man and Stan Lee talking. For me, it was always a little too meta. It was like, as a kid, I was like, who the hell is Stan Lee? Who the heck is this old guy? And where's Mary Jane? There's like 5 minutes left in the episode. You've got Spider-Man swinging around with Stan Lee. Where's his wife? That's what I want to know. Or not even his wife, because he married a clone that died, that unalived. Sorry, I'm bad at this lingo stuff. You know how and then, Spider-Man says goodbye, Stan Lee, and talks to Madam Web one last time. The final scene is Madam Web telling, well, did I mention, I forgot to mention that Uncle Ben makes an appearance because Uncle Ben is still alive in this alternate universe, and that Spider-Man brings Uncle Ben to help him fight, quote unquote fight, to help him battle against Spider Carnage. It was a lot. It was weird, and Spider Carnage ends up throwing himself through the portal because it's the only way that he can't separate himself from Carnage, and he doesn't want the entire world to end. So it was a lot. It was confusing, and I remember as a kid being confused. Out of nowhere came multiverses and all this stuff, and all this was just for an alternate universe, and you never solved the Mary Jane issue, because what happens is in the final scene of the animated series, Spider-Man and Madam Web talk, and Madam Web says something along the lines of like, and now I will take you to Mary Jane, and then credits. Like, that's it. We don't ever see Spider-Man find Mary Jane. We just kind of have to assume that he does. Apparently, there was supposed to be an entire arc in season 6 about it, but once the show was not going to be picked up for season 6, they did their best to put a bow on it, and this was it. And you know what? Like, with as messy as that finale was, Spider-Man, the animated series, is still one of my favorite shows of all time. That's how good this show was. You know, do I wish I knew what happened to Mary Jane? Yeah. And I kind of hope now that we see the success of X-Men 97, man, I'm hoping for a Spider-Man 98 or whatever they call it, man. One more season. Just give me one more season and show me what happened. And I might be manifesting this, but I truly do believe that we will see that happen one day. I didn't think it before, but because of X-Men 97, I truly believe it now. We will have it one day, and I will cover it on this show. And that's that. That's where Spider-Man, the animated series, leaves us. Not with a perfect resolution, but with Peter Parker swinging into the unknown, holding on to nothing but hope and the promise of love. We never see the real Mary Jane again. We don't get closure, but I guess that's kind of the point. I don't know. This show didn't wrap up everything in a neat little bow because Spider-Man's life never works like that. It's messy, painful, heroic, and human. But what we did get was something even more powerful. A version of Spider-Man that was allowed to grow, to struggle, to lead, to lose, and to keep going on. This series introduced a generation to the entire Marvel Universe. It made Venom, Blade, Daredevil, and the X-Men household names. It gave us multiverses before we knew what that even was, before it was even a buzzword. It made Spider-Man feel like something more than just a quippy wall crawler. It made him a symbol of resilience. For a Saturday morning cartoon, that's insane. So yeah, maybe the ending was a little frustrating, but the impact, unforgettable. This wasn't just a great superhero show. Spider-Man, the animated series, helped define what Marvel is and what Spider-Man means for decades. And no matter what dimension he's in, Peter Parker always finds a way to keep swinging. And I will never forget. In fact, I don't think any of us will ever forget. We'll always remember. Why am I? We'll always remember. And we'll never forget that with great power comes great responsibility. That's all I've got for you guys on Spider-Man, the animated series. Thank you once again. And be sure to follow me on all platforms, Toonology HQ. At Toonology HQ on Instagram, on Twitter, on TikTok, and on YouTube. Be sure to catch the video version of this on YouTube along with smaller clips of, I can make this a little bit more bite-sized for you guys, and you'll see those clips on YouTube. Follow me and you can get all those smaller, real bite-sized reels on Instagram, on TikTok, and all that and more. I really appreciate you guys tuning into this episode, and I'll be back in another 2 weeks with one more episode. Not one more, but another episode next week. I don't know if I've ever been more excited for a movie in my life, and I had to correlate it to something in this podcast. So next week, to correlate with the release of Superman in theaters, we will be covering Superman, the animated series, here on Toonology. Thanks, guys, and I'll see you guys back at the lab. Peace.